They dragged him through the corridors he once ruled. Not long ago, his voice could seal fates, crush noble houses, and command queens to kneel. Now those same halls echoed with the shuffle of shackles and the whispers of men who once bowed but now smirked. No trial could save him, no law could protect him. The king had decided. He was filthy, starving. His robes, once rich with gold embroidery, clung to him like rags soaked in sweat and humiliation. His eyes darted, searching for a friendly face. There were none, not anymore. The block awaited, the same block he had sent so many others to. The same axe, sharpened by his orders, now trembled in the hands of a nervous executioner. When it struck, it didn't fall clean. The first blow shattered bone, but not life. There were gasps not from sympathy but from horror. A second blow, then a third. At last silence. The birds outside sang as if nothing had happened, as if England hadn't just torn apart its most powerful man. How did he rise so high only to fall so brutally? Why did King Henry VIII destroy the man who made him a god on earth, who was Thomas Cromwell, and why did he die like a criminal? This is not just a story of politics. It's a story of ambition, betrayal, blood, and the brutal price of being indispensable to a king. This story is unlike anything you've heard. England in the early 1500s was a nation tangled in thorns, politically fragile, religiously divided, and led by a king whose appetite for power knew no limits. King Henry VIII sat on the throne with a singular obsession to produce a male heir. His first wife, Catherine of Aragon, had failed to give him one, and that failure in Henry's eyes threatened the very future of the Tudor dynasty. But there was a problem. Divorce under Catholic law was not an option. The Pope said no. Henry said yes. And thus began a revolution. To cast off his wife, Henry needed to cast off Rome. In one of the most seismic moves in English history, he broke from the Catholic Church, declared himself supreme head of the Church of England, and seized control of the nation's religious soul. It was treason to deny him, heresy to defy him, and death to displease him. This wasn't just about love or lust. It was about absolute power over the court, over the clergy, over the very conscience of the realm. But revolutions are not led by kings alone. Enter Thomas Cromwell. Born in obscurity around 1485, the same year, the Tudor dynasty began. Cromwell had no noble blood. His father was a blacksmith and a brewer. No estates, no titles, nothing to suggest he'd one day become the second most powerful man in England. But Cromwell was not ordinary. He was brilliant, ruthless, and utterly modern. He traveled across Europe in his youth, serving in armies, learning languages, absorbing law, trade, and finance. By the time he returned to England, he spoke Italian and French, understood the new mercantile world, and wielded a mind sharper than any sword. His rise began under the mentorship of Cardinal Wolsey, Henry VIII's powerful but doomed chief advisor. When Wolsey fell from grace, unable to secure the king's divorce from Rome, Cromwell did not fall with him. Instead, he stepped over the ruins. In a court filled with blue bloods and old families, Cromwell was a commoner. But his genius for paperwork, legal innovation, and administrative reform made him indispensable. While others schemed with swords, Cromwell changed the world with parchment and ink. He became the architect of the English Reformation, drafting laws that stripped the Pope of all authority in England. He engineered the closure of monasteries, seizing wealth for the crown, and demolishing a centuries-old religious order. It was Cromwell who gave Henry the legal authority to marry Anne Boleyn, Cromwell, who designed the instruments of obedience, Cromwell, who created the modern bureaucratic state from within the smoke of religious upheaval. He was called the King's Hammer, the King's Brain, and the King's Butcher. And yet, even as he rose, the blades around him were already being sharpened. In Henry's court, loyalty was currency, and it could be spent stolen or burned. Friends became enemies overnight. Nobles resented Cromwell's low-born background. The conservative clergy loathed his Protestant leanings. Even Anne Boleyn, once his ally, grew wary of his power. He was everywhere, and that made him a threat to everyone. But Cromwell was not just a reformer. He was an enforcer. Those who opposed the king's will, and therefore Cromwell's, found themselves on trial for treason. Heads rolled, books were burned, silence became the only path to survival. In public, he was calm, almost cold. But behind the calm lay something darker, a mind at war with itself. Was he doing this for England, for God, for Henry, or for himself? And then came the turning point. A queen would fall, heads would roll again, and Thomas Cromwell, the man who helped destroy Anne Boleyn, would rise even higher in the ashes. But power in Henry's England was never permanent. One mistake, one whisper, one enemy in the shadows, and everything could vanish. The man who had built the king's empire with laws and blood would soon find himself in a place no one expected, at the center of the very machine he created only this time as its next victim. Anne Boleyn was no ordinary queen. She was fire in a world of frost, clever, sharp-tongued, dangerously ambitious. And she wasn't just Henry VIII's wife. She was the catalyst for his greatest rebellion, the break from Rome. But fire burns, and Anne burned too brightly. By 1536, Anne had failed to produce the male heir Henry so desperately wanted. Worse, her enemies whispered that she was proud, erratic, even dangerous. Henry's affection cooled. His glances became dismissive. And in a court where love meant survival, Anne began to wither. But someone was already watching her fall. Someone who had helped raise her, now quietly preparing her end, Thomas Cromwell. Their alliance had been one of necessity, not trust. Anne had supported Cromwell's reforms, the destruction of the monasteries, the rise of Protestant influence. But she had her own ambitions, and Cromwell, above all, served only one master, the king. Anne began attacking him in private, questioning his loyalty, accusing him of corruption. She wanted him gone, but she underestimated just how well Cromwell had learned the court's oldest rule: destroy or be destroyed. Cromwell struck first. He constructed a web of accusations: adultery, incest, treason. Evidence was thin, but in Henry's court, truth was less important than obedience. Anne's own brother was accused. Musicians and courtiers were rounded up, tortured, and forced to confess. Their words were molded into the narrative Cromwell needed, and Henry, he didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. Cromwell gave him what he wanted: freedom, a way out, a clean legal kill. Anne was arrested and sent to the Tower of London. She would never leave it alive. Cromwell had proven himself once again. He was now more than an advisor. He was the king's architect of fate. In May 1536, Anne was beheaded. A French swordsman had been summoned, swift, elegant, merciful by comparison. Her death paved the way for Henry's third marriage, this time to Jane Seymour. Within a year, she gave Henry a son, Edward. Cromwell was rewarded handsomely. Titles, land, influence beyond imagining. He was now Lord Privy Seal Vicegerent, in spirituals essentially the voice of God and king on earth. But with every title came a deeper shadow. The nobles watched with disgust. How could a man born of a blacksmith command the lords of England? The Catholic faction, though beaten, had not disappeared. They burned with quiet fury at Cromwell's desecration of the monasteries, the seizure of holy lands, the persecution of bishops. His own allies grew uneasy at the speed and severity of his reforms. But Cromwell didn't slow down. He moved faster. He expanded the Reformation. More monasteries closed, more abbots executed. The king's coffers overflowed. Cromwell's power reached into every corner of England, and Europe was watching. He used spies, informants, secret arrests. His network was vast. He crushed uprisings with brutal efficiency, including the Pilgrimage of Grace, a massive rebellion of Northern Catholics. Thousands were killed, their leaders hanged in public squares. And then came the gamble that would destroy him. Jane Seymour died shortly after giving birth. Henry was heartbroken, but once again he needed a wife. Cromwell saw an opportunity to strengthen Protestant ties abroad and to secure his own position. He arranged a marriage between Henry and Anne of Cleves, a German princess aligned with the Lutheran cause. On paper, it was perfect. In person, it was a disaster. Henry met Anne and was instantly repulsed. He called her a Flanders mare, mocked her appearance, and raged at having been deceived. But the marriage had already been signed. The embarrassment was immense, and when Henry wanted someone to blame, he looked to the man who had arranged it all, Cromwell. The king began to cool. The same coldness he once showed Anne Boleyn now settled over his most trusted servant. And around Cromwell, the vultures circled. The Duke of Norfolk, a conservative Catholic, and Anne Boleyn's uncle led the charge. He had long despised Cromwell's reforms and saw a chance for revenge. Whispers turned into accusations. Cromwell was called a heretic, a traitor, an enemy of the realm. But still Cromwell worked. He tried to placate the king. He pushed for the annulment of the Cleves marriage. He continued arresting opponents, drafting laws managing the kingdom. He didn't see the knife coming. On June 10th, 1540, as he sat at a council meeting, Cromwell was suddenly arrested. No warning, no trial. The guards seized him, tore off his Order of the Garter, the highest honor the king had given him. He was dragged out as stunned faces looked on. His enemies smiled. He was sent to the Tower, the same place he had sent so many before. There alone in the cold stone chamber, he waited. He wrote desperate letters to Henry begging for mercy, protesting his loyalty, swearing he had done nothing without the king's will. But Henry did not answer. The machine had turned, and Cromwell, the man who had created that machine, now found himself crushed inside it. His titles were stripped. His allies vanished. Parliament moved quickly. A bill of attainder was passed, declaring him guilty without a trial. The very legal tool he had used to eliminate others was now being used against him. He was accused of heresy, of conspiring to marry the king's daughter, of plotting rebellion. Lies, most of it. But the truth no longer mattered. Henry was done with him. The king even remarried the day before Cromwell's execution, this time to Catherine Howard, the young and beautiful niece of the Duke of Norfolk. It was a political insult, a final humiliation. Cromwell's power, once unmatched, was gone. He had built a new England from blood and parchment. Now he would die by the same laws he created. The man who had ruled England in silence now waited for the silence of death. And what came next was even more brutal than anyone expected. The Tower of London is quiet in the early hours. Fog rolls across the Thames thick and gray like mourning cloth. The cold seeps into bone. In the darkness of his cell, Thomas Cromwell is awake. He hasn't slept. He writes endlessly. Pleas, apologies, testimonies. His final letter to Henry VIII is almost childlike in tone, frantic, terrified begging. Most gracious prince, he calls him, most merciful sovereign. Words that once carried power now fall dead on the page. There's no reply. The king is done with him. What went through Cromwell's mind in those final days? Did he replay each decision? The monasteries raised the bodies. He condemned the queens he helped destroy. Did he still believe in the cause in the Reformation he had helped forge? Or did it all look different now through prison bars beneath the weight of betrayal? The charges against him were absurd. Treason. He had lived to serve the crown. Heresy. He had only expanded what the king had ordered, and yet Parliament passed his death sentence without trial, without evidence. He had built the legal trap that now held him. There would be no escape. July 28th, 1540, the morning of his execution. The sun is cruelly bright. London is alive with movement, as if nothing is ending. As if the man who held the kingdom together for over a decade isn't about to die. They dress him in a plain shirt, no robes, no finery. His order of the Garter, his coat of arms, his family's rising name, all erased. He is dragged through the streets on a wooden cart. The people come to watch. Some cheer, some spit, others are silent shocked. Not long ago, this man's signature could destroy lives. Now he looks like a criminal, pale, hollow-eyed, half-starved. He sees familiar faces in the crowd, former allies, ministers, nobles. They do not speak to him. They do not look at him. Survival demands distance. The scaffold looms ahead. Rough wood, dark stains. The executioner waits axe in hand. Cromwell had arranged hundreds of these ceremonies. Now he climbs the steps as its victim. He turns to speak. His final words are humble. I am come hither to die, and not to purge myself, as some think peradventure that I will. He admits no guilt, only submission. I die in the Catholic faith, not doubting in any article of my faith. A cruel irony accused of heresy, dying a Catholic. Perhaps it is fear. Perhaps it is a final defiance. Or perhaps in the end, he returned to the comfort of the old ways, the ones he had helped destroy. He kneels. The block is slick and dark. He places his neck upon it, eyes closed, lips, moving perhaps in prayer, perhaps in disbelief. The axe swings. It misses. The crowd gasps. The blade tears into his neck, but not through it. Blood erupts, splattering the wood, the executioner, the earth. Cromwell screams. The second blow crashes down. Still not enough. He trembles, choking on blood body twisting. The third swing finally severs the spine. And then silence. No cheers. No mourning. Just the distant sounds of London continuing as always. His head is held aloft, as is custom. The crowd stares. This is what power ends as. A broken body. A severed head. A name soon to be erased. But the cruelty that doesn't end there. On the very same day Thomas Cromwell was executed, King Henry VIII married Catherine Howard. A wedding and beheading within hours. The message was clear. The king moves on. For years, Henry would justify Cromwell's death as a necessary purge. But in private, something shifted. Months later, he would speak of Cromwell with regret. He was a faithful servant, the king reportedly said, and I have put him to death unjustly. But regret means nothing to the dead. Cromwell's family was ruined. his name banned from court, his works and letters scattered or burned, his body, like so many others, dumped in an unmarked grave. The man who reshaped England with pen and fire was reduced to dust beneath the same walls he once ruled, and yet the machinery he built did not die with him. The Church of England remained separate from Rome. The legal reforms endured. The administrative state he crafted efficient, ruthless, became the foundation of modern governance. He changed the bones of the nation, but the cost was his own blood. If Cromwell had been born a noble, he might have been spared. If he had slowed down, been less bold, less brilliant, less dangerous, perhaps he could have survived. But Cromwell wasn't built to serve. He was built to rise, and rise he did, until the very machine he designed turned against him. Thomas Cromwell died as many of his enemies had at the hands of a king whose love was a weapon and whose justice was indistinguishable from vengeance. And the kingdom moved on. The Tower swallowed him. The wind erased his name from the stone, but the blood on England's hands remained. In the days following his execution, there was no funeral for Thomas Cromwell. No mourning bells rang. No grand procession bore his body to sacred ground. His grave was unmarked, his name stricken from royal favor, his portrait quietly removed from court walls. It was as if England had tried to forget him, but England couldn't. The machinery Cromwell created remained too vital, too integrated into the bones of the nation to be dismantled. The crown kept the wealth from the monasteries he dissolved. The Church of England, his greatest legal invention, endured evolving, but never again kneeling to Rome. And though many at court whispered prayers of relief at his fall, they knew the kingdom now ran on systems he had designed, and they could never return to what came before. His enemies tried to erase him, but even they found themselves using his tools. The bills of attainder he pioneered, they kept passing them. The financial audits he initiated, adopted, and expanded. His meticulous records, his reforms in the courts, his reshaping of Parliament, these outlived the man. But history has never quite decided what to do with Thomas Cromwell. Was he a visionary or a villain? To some, he was a tyrant in robes, the butcher of monasteries, the enforcer of royal cruelty, the destroyer of sacred tradition. They see his execution not as injustice, but as karma, a man undone by the very blade he helped swing. To others, he was a genius, a commoner who outthought the aristocracy, outmaneuvered the Vatican, and dragged England into modernity by sheer will and intellect. He made law the language of power. He made kings accountable to paperwork. He imagined a government that did not vanish when a monarch fell ill or rayed into madness. He was dangerous precisely because he was effective. Centuries later, his name would rise again, not in court, but in books, in letters, in fiction. Historians would debate him. Novelists would revive him. Plays and television would rediscover the man behind the myth, not as a caricature of cruelty, but as a deeply human figure, brilliant, wounded, ruthless, and afraid. His letters, those that survived, reveal a man of sharp wit and weary soul. He wrote not like a tyrant, but like a man always running out of time. He advocated for the poor, negotiated for peace, and in private grieved those he lost. But none of it mattered in the face of royal favor. When Henry turned, no virtue could save him. Cromwell's legacy is not written in statues. There are no national monuments in his name. But he lives in the structure of power itself, in the invisible rules that govern monarchs' ministers and courts. He lives in every legal document that defines the limits of a ruler, in every bureaucracy that outlasts a despot. He was not mourned as a martyr, but in time he became a warning that even the most powerful men can fall. That being indispensable to a king does not mean being safe from him. That building the future may cost you your life in the present. And for England, Cromwell left a final unspoken lesson that revolutions born in the name of reform often end with blood on the floor, silence in the tower, and the heads of their architects in a basket. He rose from nothing, rewrote the kingdom, and died by the very laws he created. Thomas Cromwell wasn't just a servant of the king, he was the engine behind Henry VIII's greatest triumphs and darkest deeds. And yet in the end, he was as disposable as any pawn in the Tudor game. But Cromwell's story is only one piece of the puzzle. Because if you think his fall was brutal, wait until you learn what happened to Catherine Howard, the young queen who thought love could protect her. She believed her beauty could melt the king's heart. She was wrong, very wrong. Click here to uncover the tragic tale of a teenage queen destroyed by secret's betrayal and a letter she never should have written. And if you're fascinated by how history buries its masterminds and glorifies its monsters, subscribe for more stories they don't teach you in school. Some rose too fast, some fell too hard, and some never got the ending they deserved.